This video is brought to you by AudioQuest, makers of the Dragonfly range of USB DACs. Click to AudioQuest.com for more information.
You've seen it in many videos leading up to this one. It's the NAD M10 V2. It's part of NAD's Masters series of amplifiers. This is the second generation version of the M10, and it's still a Class D amplifier. And it still gives us 100 watts per channel into 8 ohms and 4 ohms. And it still features the same, I think, probably, 32-bit, 384 kilohertz capable DAC as the original. So what gives? The M10 V2 sells for $2,750 US, and it's still Calixfi. And if you don't know what that means, you need to go back and watch my original M10 review, because that video contains, I guess, what we'd call assumed knowledge for this one. So what is actually new in this V2 model? Well, we get what NAD called improved gain algorithms, which essentially means that this new version is probably better capable of driving harder to drive loudspeakers. We also still get a 7-inch IPS LCD touchscreen on the front, but apparently NAD have improved the viewing angles. And I can tell you it's way, way better than the touchscreen Pi that we showed about a month ago. Now, I can't test NAD's claims about the screen's wider viewing angles or this amplifier's better handling of harder to drive speakers, because I no longer have the original M10. What I can tell you is when we're using the hardwired inputs, we still get the dancing VU meters in place of the cover art, album name, artist info on the streaming inputs. And thanks to the N10's internal Blue OS streaming module, there are many, many, many different ways that we can stream audio into the M10 V2. So we get Roon, Tidal Connect, Spotify Connect, AirPlay 2, Bluetooth. And then inside the Blue OS app, we get Amazon HD Music, Deezer, and Qobuz. That makes it Futurefy with a capital F, maybe 2 capital Fs. But in a nod to the old school, NAD give us an infrared remote control this time out, which we didn't get with the OG M10. And once I've pulled up music on Roon or Spotify or Tidal, I generally use that remote wand more than any other way of controlling this amp. Yes, I can control it on the touchscreen on the front, but getting up and then sort of bending down to control it, I don't love doing that so much. You know, I guess it's a nice thing to have in theory, but for me in practice, it doesn't really convince me that touchscreens on a device are as important as having smartphone capable controls, and then also, yeah, a traditional infrared remote, which I find really useful. Now, obviously, that infrared remote only gives us play, pause, volume up and down, track skipping. If you want to get really, really smug-tastic about controlling the NAD M10 V2, you can actually use the Blue OS app on an Apple Watch. In my original NAD M10 review, I compared it to the Naim Uniti Atom, a similar shoebox-sized amplifier. Now that additionally gives us support for Chromecast, it gives us a headphone socket, and it gives us possibly the best volume wheel that I've ever used. Having said that, the Naim app really isn't as polished or as accomplished as the Blue OS app. I'm talking smartphone apps here and tablet apps. Now, in playing PJ Harvey's Rid of Me, produced by Steve Albini, I hear a certain crispness from the cymbals on that record that I don't recall hearing on the original M10. Now, unfortunately, that kind of comparison stretched over time using audio memory going back 2 years is wholly unreliable. You just can't do it. So again, in this video, I'm going to compare the NAD M10 V2 to the Naim Unity Atom. But I don't hear that cymbal crispness on the Naim Unity Atom with PJ Harvey's Rhythm. Which brings us early to the spicy finding in this video, in that I think the NAD M10 V2 has as much get up and go, as much microdynamic flair as the Naim Unity Atom. And I didn't find that with the original comparison. This is what Brits like to call Pratt. Pace, rhythm and timing. I do think that the new NAD matches the Naim in that respect. The NAD is also a little bit more lit up in the lower treble than the Naim, which I would call a little bit softer and a little bit rounder, which is no bad thing. And that makes the NAD M10 V2 perhaps better suited to maybe warmer loudspeakers or thicker sounding speakers like the Bongcloud S400 Mark II that we made a video about last week. However, the NAD gives us that squeegee clean transparency that I talk about a lot these days that the Naim Unity Atom really can't muster. Now, how you feel about this will largely fall to your listener type. Because, are you ready for this? We don't all listen for the same things. We might think we do, but subconsciously that might not be the case. So if you're somebody who really gets off on sort of the ultra resolution of sound and being able to see all the tiny details, then you're likely going to prefer the NAD M10 V2. However, if you're somebody who doesn't care as much about those details, who doesn't lose the wood for the trees as much and enjoys the overall gestalt of music, then you're more likely to prefer the Naim Unity Atom. Now, in this side-by-side comparison, I generally preferred the Naim's more organic presentation when listening to that PJ Harvey album, or listening to Television's Marquee Moon, or listening to some hip-hop from the notorious B.I.G. But that's because I'm more of an emotional listener when there are vocals present. When there are no vocals present, I think my brain kicks into more of a cerebral, visual type listening mode. So when it comes to electronic music, I generally prefer the NAD's greater specificity and detail retrieval. So in that sense, I feel once again torn down the middle by these amplifiers. And if this is where this story ended, I'd be like, I don't know which is the best one. You'll have to go and listen for yourself. But we're only getting started. If I want to get the most when listening to Deadbeat's Dubby the Double Bongcloud EP, I really need to add a subwoofer to the system. So behind me, you can see the GoldenEar BRX loudspeakers. What you can't see that's directly behind me because I'm blocking it is GoldenEar's Forcefield 3 subwoofer. And when I want to add a sub, I find myself sort of pulled away from the Naim's superior haptics and its excellent Zigbee remote control and towards the bass management system that the NAD amplifier gives us. Because inside the BlueOS app, we can just tell it how many subwoofers we have connected to its sub out. In fact, there are 2 of them. And then we could tell it where we would like the crossover frequency to take place, and it will design the crossover for us. So all we have to do is fuss a little bit over the gain on the sub and maybe position, but I think I've got that pretty much sorted in this room for now. And we don't get bass management from the Naim. The Naim just asks us to feed our subwoofer from its preamplifier outputs in what we generally call augmentation mode. Now, when listening to that Deadbeat EP, I much prefer the NAD's take on events, on musical events. And maybe that's down to the fact that the NAD gives us high pass filtering on our mains, whereas the Naim does not. And if you're at all confused by what I just said, then you need to listen to episode 30 of the Darko.Audio podcast. However, these amplifier differences, subwoofer or not, are small potatoes compared to the audible elevation afforded by what I think is the NAD M10 V2's main draw card, and that is Dirac room compensation. And for that, we go over to Terry Ellis in London.
Thanks, John. My name is Terry Ellis. I'm a professional Dirac Live calibrator, and I helped John set up Dirac in his NAD amplifier by remote dialing into his computer and controlling the Dirac software. We used a calibrated microphone and measured his speaker's performance at specific points around John's main listening position. Dirac then creates a target curve that's trying to optimize the sound that John will hear by trying to flatten the frequency response and undoing some of the negative effects of the room. I then created some custom target curves that are more specific to John's system and his taste.
So Terry TeamViewered into my MacBook to install Dirac on at least 3 occasions in the last 5 months. We Dirac'd the Zoosol 6, and then we did the Vivid Audio Kaya S12 with the KEF KC62 subwoofer. And then most recently, we did the GoldenEar system that you see behind me. So the BRX and the Forcefield 3 subwoofer. And then with those target curves that Terry talked about loaded into the NAD M10 V2, I could switch Dirac on and off, but then also move through those target curves when I felt like changing it up a little bit. Now, I definitely prefer Dirac on. Now, I know you're looking at my room thinking, well, doesn't John have a treated room? Yes, I do, but I don't have a lot of low frequency treatment, which is where really I think Dirac comes into play for rooms like this. You know, you treat the room and then you use Dirac to ice the cake. Now, for me, Dirac made the biggest difference or the biggest improvement to the Zoosol 6 and the least to the Vivid Kaya S12. And I also thought that the standard correction curve that Dirac delivers out of the box was just a little bit too dry, a little bit too light on in the bass, and which is why I asked Terry just to kind of create a few custom curves for me to give me a little bit more push in the low end, and in one curve a little bit more of a tickle in the top end for the GoldenEars behind me. Now, where I think Dirac really excels is improving the soundstage layout or organization of sounds or musicians. Sometimes that's called imaging. I hear that very nicely on this new compilation of remixes just issued by Kraftwerk. I think it's been on streaming services for a year or so, but it's only just come to CD and vinyl. And it's a great, I hate to use the word test disc, but it is. I mean, it's a great way to kind of just work out, you know, what's going on your soundstage and depth and width and things like that. And yeah, Dirac makes better sense of the music. And the way I tend to explain it is that with Dirac off, when you've heard Dirac and you go back to it not being engaged, you kind of go, oh, that sounds horrible and wrong. And then you re-engage it and go, oh, that makes much more sense. And horrible and wrong means the sort of mid-range appears as this big ball between the speakers. But then when you engage Dirac, even the standard curve, it sort of pushes it back and then spreads it around between the speakers. Now, because we're tidying up low frequencies more than, I guess, mid-range and higher frequencies, explicitly so anyway, the knock-on effect of tidying up your bass is you also get to tidy up the mid-range. I think that's what's going on here. But the takeaway here is that the NAD M10 V2, with Dirac set up properly and engaged, for me, blows the Naim Unity Atom out of the water. I'm joking, of course, with the blows it out of the water, because nothing really does that. But the NAD M10 V2 is comfortably better than the Naim Unity Atom once Dirac has been properly set up and engaged. Now there is one caveat to this, is that I think Dirac, you can absolutely do it by yourself. The process in conducting the measurements is super easy. There's a microphone supplied in the box. What isn't so easy is knowing what you're doing when customizing the target curve, which is why I asked for Terry's help in doing this, because I think for beginners there's a high risk of just experimenting a little bit and messing things up. So if you've got the time for trial and error, then great. But if you don't, then maybe, you need to get a professional to help you with the Dirac setup, as I did. Now this brings us to the Lyngdorf TDAI-1120, which has its own room compensation algorithm inside. It's called Room Perfect. Now I still have the Lyngdorf here, so I could do a side-by-side comparison between the NAD and the Lyngdorf. Now in their stock form, I found the NAD to be brawnier and ballsier than the more sort of finessed and skeletal sounding Lyngdorf. But that's with the GoldenEar loudspeakers, no sub, no room compensation engaged. But with the sub and room compensation added, this is a much, much closer race or battle or competition. None of these things are battles or competitions, but this is, I guess, the nature of side-by-side comparisons. Now, Dirac on the NAD ultimately did a better job for me, but only really with the help of Terry Ellis. If I were forced to go it alone, I'd probably opt for the Room Perfect on the Lyngdorf. I think the whole setup procedure is a little bit more user-friendly, and the out-of-the-box target curve and therefore audible result for me is just a little bit more satisfying. There's just a little bit more low-end push. Also, the Lyngdorf has power user features that allow me to just tweak the phase alignment of the subwoofer a little bit more accurately. I don't know how you would even do that in Dirac. I'm pretty sure they have a subwoofer base module coming in their software, but I think that's fairly pricey. Whereas with the Room Perfect, it's completely free. The Dirac, I do have the full frequency range version installed. I had to pay an extra $100 for that, but I think that's well worth it. Yes, the NAD amplifier is Ethernet and Wi-Fi capable, but this amplifier is not just about streaming music from the cloud or from a nearby server. For example, I've got my TV connected to its HDMI eARC input. I also connected my Project CD transport to the coaxial socket on the back of the NAD. And I've also got a little XIAOMI Mi Box S, which I was using with my projector previously, and that was going Toslink into the back of the NAD. And then also my turntable and its phono stage. I come out of the phono stage and go analog in to the back of the NAD M10 V2 amplifier. Now, some of you will be thinking at this stage, there's no bloody way I'm going to have the NAD digitize my precious phono stage signal. No way. But here's the thing. I just cannot relate to people who think like that, because with all that the NAD gives us, especially with room correction, we gain far more from Dirac than we lose from the A to D conversion that greets an analog signal coming into the amplifier. Now, in the box with the NAD M10 V2 were a pair of Bluesound Pulse Flex 2i. These are like little pint-sized wireless speakers. I've got one there and one there. Why do I have them here like that? Well, they're set up wirelessly. You can do Ethernet if you want to, there's no Ethernet here. But I'm using these as wireless rear surrounds for the M10 V2. Because what the DSP in the M10 V2 can also do is create sort of fake surround sound for stereo content, which is great for music. I have these set actually quite a low level, and they just give, I normally sit here, and they just give me a little bit of a tickle from behind. It's not a full range signal that gets sent to these loudspeakers. It's heavily filtered and focuses on the sort of upper mids. So it kind of just fills out the recording a little bit. And it's really, really good for live albums like LCD Sound System's Shut Up and Play the Hits. But also with the TV feeding the NAD using HDMI ARC, I can now tap 5.1 surround content from Netflix. And what the NAD does is converts that into 4.0 or 4.1 sound channels. Now I've got a 4.1 system running here, so the 2 GoldenEars, then the sub, then these 2 surrounds. So now I have a sort of wireless surround sound system, so no wires like running under the rug and across the floor, which I would never in a million years do. Nor would I ever kind of drill speakers into the ceiling because, well, yeah, acoustic panels are far more important to me than having Dolby Atmos. But, you know, a 4.1 system is a lot of fun, I guess, when watching a movie. I'm not super into movies, but it still enhances the Netflix viewing experience. And then the virtual surround for stereo content enhances the stereo experience. Sorry, Olaf just reminded me that I said that the Blue Sound, the little pint-sized speakers came in the box. Yeah, NAD sent me those for me to test this. They don't ship free with the M10 V2. But here's the thing, is that you can see that the NAD has expanded my listening world, if you like. It's one of the reasons I've got a TV now, one of them, so I can use the eARC connection. That's one of those reasons. So really for me, this NAD M10 V2 is not all about the music. Neither does it get out of the way of the music because, in fact, it does my vinyl, it does my streaming, it does TV and surround sound and virtual surround sound. It does everything. So this may be a really good solution for people like me who predominantly listen to music but occasionally like to watch movies and Netflix and YouTube and things like that. It's what we might call a home entertainment hub. Is that a bit cheesy? Maybe it is a little bit cheesy, I don't know. But cheesy or not, this NAD M10 V2 has made me play more music and also watch more YouTube and Netflix than I've done with any other amplifier that I've reviewed in the last few years. And I think that's a total win. So if you like this video, please hit the like button down below. If you like my attitude towards high-end audio in that it factors in room correction software and DSP and HDMI connections from TVs and surround sound and virtual surround sound and all these other things, if you dig that, then please subscribe to this channel. And as always, thank you ever so much for watching. Those differences pale into no, this is not right. And I don't hear that cymbal crisp, I can't even say it. And I don't hear that crispness. Why can't I say it? And that brings us to the Lyngdorf TDAI, no. However, the NAG. Now in this side-by-side comparison, I generally prefer, if I want to get the most from Deadbeat's very dubby, the double, I can't even say that either, the double, blah, blah, blah. There's so many D's and B's in this title. Okay, one thing this NAD amp made me do was play more music than I've ever done with pretty much any other amplifier that I've tested than any other amplifier that I can recall. Oh, why can't I get this right, Olaf? Than any other amplifier that